Hi everyone. Welcome to Storytime with Jocelyn. I really want to apologize for not having the video up a few days ago like we usually do. But this past weekend I've been busy, and Friday Mama was suffering from migraines, so we just couldn't get the video up. But that being said, we will start with our third part of Hocus Pocus today. And I would also like to throw out to all the parents out there that Hocus Pocus is a little disclaimer for kids that are being eaten. There's witches, but it's a lot of fun and a lot of fiction and a lot of, Halloween Hocus Pocus. So if your kids have seen the Disney's Hocus Pocus, the book is okay for y'all. Otherwise being said, if you don't like to have those kind of horror elements in your child's life, you don't have to watch today's video. I've always said to always pay attention to what the title of the book is and check on the descriptions about what the book is about. So, that being said, let us begin with the third part of Hocus Pocus. Now, if you remember, the last time the kids were about to go and see the parents after they were worried about what to do. So now we're going to begin with the Old Salem Crypt. So let us begin. Jocelyn is in a good mood today with Hocus Pocus. Winifred groaned when she saw her reanimated ex scrawning in the dirt to find his own head. "Ah, Krusk," she said. "He lost his head." She launched herself and her broom into a tight and angry circle. "Damn that Thackeray Binks," she cried. "Damn him!" Beneath her, Billy bleated through his mouth stitches. "Which way did they go?" Winifred asked, guiding herself closer to him. He couldn't speak, of course, but he didn't point the way either. She realized he must have gotten directionally confused when his skull went spinning. She looked around the graveyard and noticed a tunnel entrance partially hidden by climbing vines. The twigs around it was broken if they had been repeatedly trodden on. "Billy!" she snapped, turning back to his desiccated corpse. "Listen to me!" His skin and spine crackled and popped as he forced his head back onto his body. "Follow those children, you maggot museum, and get my book. Then come find us and we'll be ready for them." She drifted backward, offended by the intensity of the dislike in his eyes. "Quit staring at me! Get moving down that hole!" With that, she led her sisters back over the graveyard fence, muttering, "Damn! Double damn!" Winifred landed lightly on the walk beyond the graveyard gate. In the distance, she could see the bell tower of the small graveyard chapel, its delicate lines and single bell outlined white by the pale moon. As Winifred hurried to the fence, she felt a shock of remembrance from having walked that precise path before. She stood there and clutched the gate and watched a graveyard wedding take place more than 300 years before, had watched another Sanderson say her vows in the only place where Winifred and her sisters didn't dare intervene. "They're here," Winifred said. She just could not mean the children, or she couldn't have met the wedding party. For a moment, even Winifred wasn't sure. The fence was wrapped with tendrils of dead and dying English ivy as she pressed her fingertips to the rough bodies of the vines. She imagined her old mortality and shuddered. It brought her back to the year 1993 and to the task very much at hand. "The children," she said. Her voice gained strength. "And that flea-ridden cat. I know they're here, but where are they?" She turned her face toward her burnt sister. "Sniff them out, Mary." She ignored Sarah entirely, who had started to climb the gate. But to what end, if they could not step foot on hallowed ground? Mary clenched her fists and breathed deeply. There, she pressed her face against the iron bars and gave a plaintive sigh. Oh, I can't. They're gone too far. I've lost them. Winifred snatched the lobe of Mary's left ear and dragged her away from the fence. I'll have your guts for garters, girl, she said, shoving her sister away. Confound you! Mary clutched at her aching ears, shriveling. Very well, said Winifred, almost to herself. We must outwit them. When Billy the Butcher gets here with my book, we shall be ready for them. She turned back to her third sister. Sarah, let us start collecting the children. Why? Asked Mary softly. Because, you great buffoon, Winifred said, wondering why the devil had cursed her mother with so many senseless offspring. We want to live forever, not just until tomorrow. The more children we snatch, the longer we live. Right, Sarah said brightly, pointing at Mary. Let us fly. Fly, agreed Winifred. Wait, Mary said, causing the other two Sandersons to turn. I have an idea. She plucked the brooms from her sister's hands. Since this promises to be more dire and stressful evening, I suggest we form a calming circle. I am calm, said Winifred. Oh, sister, Mary said gently, thou art not being honest with thyself, are we? She leaned in as she might to a little girl. Come on, give me a smile. Winifred allowed a bashful grimace and then hoped and hopped into place, starting the calming circle. Mary and Sarah followed suit, each placing a hand on Winifred's shoulders. It wasn't a real spell circle, perhaps, but it made Winifred's younger sisters happy, and on very rare occasions, that magic was enough. Allison and Max let Binks lead the way through the dark, dripping tunnels that sank between the streets of Salem. Danny did a better job of keeping up with him, perhaps because she knew he'd do a better job of catching any mice or rats than Max would. When he decided his little sister and the sarcastic cat were out of earshot, Max cleared his throat. So, he said, not daring to look at Allison, about earlier, I want to apologize. For lighting the candle? No, but I'm sorry for that too. For ignoring us when we said it was time to go. Max scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Yeah, sorry for that too. For your Rico Suave stunt with the phone number? I knew you were upset about that. I wasn't upset about it, Allison said, just embarrassed for you. You know, you don't have to be someone you're not just to ask a girl out. There it was, sitting between the two of them, the specter of Max asking Allison on a date. Because that's what the whole thing boiled down to, right? He'd been too chicken to catch her in the hallway, just the two of them, and tell her that he liked her and wanted to buy her ice cream, if she was okay with that idea. Instead, he escalated, and now 3 undead witches have put Danny on a dinner menu. Max knew it, but he didn't know how to answer Allison. He didn't know what to do to make things right. Yeah, I get that, he finally said, but I guess I wanted to apologize for what Danny said earlier about you. It was embarrassing, and I'm sorry she did that. What did she say about me? About your costume, about your, he stopped talking and gestured lamely at his chest. You mean how she told me you talked about my boobs? Max blushed. Yeah, he said in a small voice, thinking that he'd rather be lost in those tunnels and facing death by sewer alligators than having that conversation. You don't have to apologize for that, said Allison. Danny didn't do anything wrong. You might want to apologize for yourself, though. Max cleared his throat. Yeah, he said for what felt like the 100th time. I am sorry. I was an idiot, like a total idiot. But I wanted to tell my friend back in California about you. And he got bored with me talking about other stuff, so I thought, he cleared his throat again. But yeah, I was dumb, and it was my fault. Not his or Danny's. I do get that. Thanks, Allison said, uncrossing her arms. Max snuck a look at her face and determined she meant it. I appreciate it. It's just a little weird, you know? Their footsteps echoed lightly off the walls as they continued, following Binks's shadowy lead. Up ahead, they heard Danny telling Binks something about space travel. I know, Max said, and I do know you're so much more than your, He blushed, realizing he was about to make the same mistake all over again. Allison laughed about it this time. You really aren't quick on the uptake, are you? She laughed again, and the sound of it bounced along with their footsteps, making Max's heart flutter. So, what other stuff? She asked. Huh? Your other stuff your friend didn't want to hear about. What was it? Max wet his lips. He didn't really want to tell her such personal stuff, but then again, it was about her, so it was hard to use that defense. Besides, he had already gotten in a mess by saying the wrong thing. Like the vase you made in sculpture class last week was sick. All those dots of blue and white in the glaze, it was awesome. And when Nancy fell asleep in chemistry and you slipped her the answer when Mrs. Jackson called on her, that was really cool of you. I like that even though you're the best person in the class, you don't rub it in. Allison smiled, eyes downturned as she quickly picked up her way around a pile of mushy leaves. Yeah, well, she said, Nancy's parents are getting divorced. She deserves a break. Also, I am not better at Kim than anyone else is. Charles is. Charles is just louder, said Max. Allison tucked a lock of her hair behind her ear. You really noticed all that stuff? Yeah, said Max. I hope it's not creepy. She laughed again. No, it's not, she said. I like those things about me too. I just like that you work so hard. I don't know what you want to be when you grow up and whatever, but you are going to be it, Allison. You don't give yourself any excuses. It's attractive. Thanks, Allison said again. Max could hear her smile in that single simple word. He waited for her to acknowledge that he admitted he liked her, but he did not directly. Instead, she said, I like the way you treat Danny. You were a total idiot back there with the candle, she added quickly, but I can tell how much you love her. You're more you when she's around, more humble. I like that. She's got a lot of dirt on me, he joked, shrugging. Plus, she's smarter than I am, and she's 8. It's hard not to be humble. At that, Allison grinned. What I meant was, I wish you acted around other people the way you act around her. It's good look on you. Max scrutinized Allison's face, but it was too dark to tell exactly what she was thinking. He opened his mouth to ask, but Mink's voice cut through the dark, making them both jump. Here we are, called the cat. Up and out. Thanks, soothing thoughts, said Mary in her most centered voice. The sisters grasped arms and leaned into one another, revolving in a slow circle. Rabid bats, she suggested. Bath, Black Death, and Mummy Scorpion Pie. With that, they broke apart and arranged themselves in a line, each sister lifting her face to the full moon. Mother! They breathed in unison. A massive vehicle rolled up and stopped right in front of them. A set of doors near the front folded open with a mechanical gasp. Inside, a man, perhaps in his 40s, perched on a tall seat behind a set of controls. He looked at the sisters and gave them a luscious grin. Bubble, bubble, he said. I'm in trouble. Winifred blushed. Tell me, friend, what is this contraption? I call it... He spit a wad of gum through the window beside him. A bus. Winifred stroked her cheek with a 2-inch fingernail. A bus? She repeated. And its purpose? He opened his arms to welcome them in, to convey gorgeous creatures such as yourself to your most... He paused, drawing a fisted hand toward his chest. Forbidden desires, he finished meaningfully. Winifred giggled. Well, she said, fancy. She glanced at her sisters and back at the swaggering driver. We desire children, she said. He laughed loudly at that. Hey, that may take me a couple of tries, but I don't think there will be a problem. Hop on up. Winifred led the way. As with the Sanderson practice, Sarah slided onto the driver's lap. How does it work? She asked, planting 2 hands on the wheel in front of her. Oh, gumdrop, the driver said. It's already working. The door hissed shut and the bus trembled back to life. He helped her guide onto the road. Sarah squealed, clapping, and the bus veered into the opposite lane. The driver sat up straighter and grabbed onto the wheel. Sarah wrestled it back for herself, and as she did, her head bopped into his field of vision. A black cat appeared in the middle of the road as if out of nowhere, and Sarah gunned the escalator. The bus clanked. One set of wheels buck up a couple of inches and then dropped back into place and kept going. Whoa, said the driver, peering around her shoulder. Speed bump. Sarah pressed the button in the middle of the wheel, delighting in the high-pitched toot of the bus's horn. Binks! Called Danny, distressed. Seconds before, Max had lifted off the manhole cover overhead and started to climb out of the drainage tunnels, and he had ducked back down, shouting, Look out! Now the cat was nowhere to be seen. Max hurried to push the heavy metal disc off again. He pulled himself up and then helped Danny and Allison climb out too. Oh my God, Max said as he spotted Binks' flattened body in the middle of the road. He didn't react quickly enough to block Danny from seeing. She cried out and buried her face in Allison's sweater. No, she sobbed. It's all my fault, Max said, starting to space. Allison took his wrist. Max, it's not your fault, she said. Danny grabbed onto his sleeve. Look, she said. The 3 of them watched, amazed, as Binks' side inflated like a balloon, as if he were taking a very deep breath. There was the sound of air filling desperate lungs, and the soft snap of bones realigning. Binks rolled over and looked up at them, shaking his head as if to clear it. I hate it when that happens, he said. Max, Allison, and Danny exchanged looks. What? Said Binks, rolling into a stretch. I told you, I can't die. He took a step toward Danny. Are you all right? He asked, studying her small face. She nodded injuriatically. Yeah, she said with a tearful streak smile. He darted over to bat at her shoelaces. When she giggled, he took a step back, seemingly satisfied. Okay, he said, his yellow eyes peering into pale green ones. Then let's go find your parents. Amok! 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 Winifred and Mary sat across the aisle from each other at the back of the bus, ignoring their sister Sarah's shenanigans. Outside, creatures milled about, going from house to house in strangest clothes. Mary leaped to her feet. Stop! She yelled. The bus screeched to a halt and everyone turned to her. I smell children, she said, grinning. Marvelous, said Winifred, standing as well. Sarah hopped off the driver's lap and hurried toward them. Hey, Cupcake, the driver said, grabbing her arm. Don't I get your phone number? Your area code? You want my route schedule? Sarah simpered. Oh, she said, batting a hand as if suddenly shy. Thou will hate me in the morning. No, I wouldn't, he insisted. Winifred gathered up her satin skirts and hurried to Sarah's side. Oh, believe me, she said to the man, thou wouldst. She extracted Sarah's arm from his grip and gave him a warning look. Party pooper, he grumbled. Winifred turned up her nose at him and led her sisters off the bus. Ahead of them stood a small house whose yard billowed with crimson smoke. pitchforks jouted out of the soil. "What is this, sisters?" Winifred asked, eyeing a short figure in a plush turtle body. It waved and scurried off. In fact, creatures wore past the sisters from all directions, ducking and dodging and giggling as they crisscrossed the road. They were unlike any of the creatures Winifred had seen during her 300 years in hell. But then again, her own circle of reference had been somewhat limited and rather remonstrous. Simple ghouls and goblins served as waitstaff in Lord Satan's palace, and the Sandersons had never received an invitation. Instead, they willed away their hours with the likes of chupacabras and bunny-ups and terror beasts, and a towering black-capped man who never showed his face. "What are those?" asked Mary, clenching Winifred's sleeve. She jumped at the sight of a small white figure with a smooth round head and letters NASA tattooed over its heart. "What's that?" Said Winifred. She tried to get a better look at the faces of the quick-moving fiends. "Hobgoblins?" she said decisively. A miniature angel glided over and curtsied, gold wings bobbling. "Bless you," she said sweetly. The sisters shrieked and shrank back as she dashed away. "Enough!" Winifred said, catching her breath. Mary trembled as she looked around. "Oh, sisters," she feared, "I'm very confused. I smell children, but I don't see children." She gave a plaintive cry. "I've lost my powers!" "Enough! Enough!" Winifred repeated, slapping her gently on the side of her face. "Sorry," Mary said with a sniffle. Jocelyn, "We are witches," Winifred insisted. "We are evil. What would Mother say if she could see us like this?" The three witches lifted their brooms toward the eastern sky and said in unison, "Mother!" A sharp, high laugh broke through the night. The witches turned and saw an old man clad in red, white hair settled in wisps about his ears. "Master!" they cried. One by one, the sisters spotted their brooms at their gate and propping the handles against the slats of a pristine white fence, and hurried over, bowing and scrapping at his doorsteps. "What kind of costumes are those?" the man asked. The witches bowed deeply, arms extended. Even in hell, they've only seen Lord Satan from afar when he passed through on a black cauldron and chariot to survive and survey his domain. "It's the Sanderson Sisters, right?" he asked. The sisters simpered and clapped. Yes, at your service," Winifred said. "Haven't seen you for centuries," said Satan, which made Winifred blush because she hadn't thought he would remember their first and heretofore only meeting, when she pledged herself to the Sisterhood of Red Riches and received her spell book. "Why don't you come in?" he asked, waving them through the door. They resembled in the main room of the house, which was surprisingly homey and cluttered. "I want you to meet the little woman," Satan told the Sandersons. "He has a little woman?" Winifred whispered to Mary. "Sounds tasty," she replied. The man leaned over a plush chair to speak to a woman whose face was hidden by a table lantern. "Petunia face!" "What?" she snapped. "We have company." "I don't care who!" She sat up and the Sandersons gasped at the powerful twist wrapped through her curls. "Sisters!" Mary whispered. "Satan has married Medusa! See the snakes in her hair?" The women snarled at the sisters, who stepped back, fearful of waking her snakes. "My 3 favorite witches," said Satan. "Aren't you broads a little old to be trick-or-treating?" asked Medusa. "We'd be younger in the morning," Winifred told her. The woman snorted. "Yeah, sure." she said. Me too. Right, Jocelyn? She left her drink on a nearby table and retreated up the staircase. Mary walked over to experiment with the box the woman had been observing. It seemed to transport the watcher to another world, and she sat down on the comfortable chair before it to get a better look. In the box, a small dog scurried across the polished wood floors, and Mary laughed and shouted, ducking and turning her own body to help it avoid obstacles. Winifred wandered into another room and let out a delightful sound when she found Satan's torture devices, wooden mallets and knives arranged along a metal strip for ease of access. There were 2 circles of fire as well, one boiling a pot of water and another that seemed to be cooking sugared mud. Winifred returned to the main part of the house just as Satan's wife came back down the stairs. They both laid eyes on Sarah, who was dancing slowly with the devils. "Master," she said softly. With that, the woman of the house made the lights brighter and stormed down the stairs. "Okay, that's it," she snapped. "Party is over." Sarah broke away from her dance and Mary sat up quickly. "Get out of my house," said Jocelyn. Right, said the woman. "Pudding face," her husband pleaded, approaching her. "Shove it, Satan," she snapped. "Oh," said Sarah seriously, "thou shalt not speak to master in such a manner." "They call me master," the man said, pleased. "Wait till you see what I'm gonna call you," said his wife. She threw some brightly colored bags at the sisters. "Take her Clark bars and get out of my house." Winifred stalked forward, putting herself between her sisters and the pale, tired-looking woman. "Make us," she said. "Honey bunch," said the old man. "Ralph," the woman said sharply. "Sick 'em!" A small furry demon leaped up and chased the sisters from the house. The demon stopped at the doorstep and trotted back inside. The sisters ran past the way of the road where they paused to catch their breaths. "My broom!" Sarah cried, realizing it had gone missing. "My broom!" echoed Mary. "My broom!" Winifred huffed. "Purloined curses!" They started down the road on foot. "Sisters, look!" said Mary, holding up a candy bar she'd taken from the house. "'Tis the chocolate-covered finger of a man named Cluck." She bit into it. She spat it out. "It's candy!" she said, anguished. "Why would the master give us candy?" "Because he is not our master," said Winifred sharply. "He isn't? And these are not hobgoblins," Winifred added. She tore the mask from a passing creature, revealing the startled face of a small blonde boy. "See?" she said, gesturing. "Cool it, man!" cried the boy. Mary touched his arm. "A child!" she said hungrily. The boy hit her with a bulging fabric sack. "Weirdos!" he shouted as he ran away. "Weirdos?" repeated Sarah. "Sisters," said Winifred. "All Hallows Eve has become a night of frolic where children wear costumes and run amok." "Amok," chortled Sarah. "Amok, amok, 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 amok." Winifred elbowed her in the stomach, and Sarah doubled over, clutching her abdomen. "Oh, Winnie," pleaded Mary. "Just one child." "We haven't had the time, sister," said Winifred. "We must find my book. Then shall May have as many children as thou desires." Mary hummed. "Boiled and toasted and sauteed and roasted and—" "Yes, yes, yes," Winifred interrupted, knitting her fingers together eagerly. "But first, the book." And now, the next chapter is, "I put a spell on you." Let us begin. At last, Max and the girls homed in on Salem's town hall, a 2-story brick building with the sound of a live band spilling out and down the street. The windows of the second floor were washed with purple light from the party happening inside, and a banner above the double stores reads, Salem's 16th Annual Town Hall Pumpkin Ball. "Oh, great," Max said, leading the group across the street. "How are we ever going to find Mom and Dad in this place?" "I'll wait outside," said Binks, jumping into the low branches of a nearby tree. "If anything happens, shout for me." Max eyed the noisy building. "How will you hear us?" he asked. "I won't," said Binks, "but it might help you feel better." Danny held out her arms and Binks relented, leaping into them. Max jogged up the steps to open the door for Allison and Danny. "I should be eating a peanut M&Ms right now," Danny muttered as she stalked past. "Actually," said Max, "you should be in bed." She rolled her eyes. "I'm going to go find Mom," she called to Max before disappearing between a policewoman and a jellyfish. Town Hall's second floor was a huge ballroom, and it was packed with half the adults in Salem. On the raised stage, a skeleton in a top hat sang Sinatra's Witchcraft. The band members were dressed as skeletons too, and they really blasted the brass. Max wondered, feelingly, whether their drummer would give him lessons. "I know, Jocelyn." The whole audience was dressed up, and they seemed to have gone all out. Max spotted a squinted Viking, a knight in a full suit of silver armor, and a timely Bill Clinton. "Are you sure your parents can fix this?" Allison shouted over the music. "What if they don't believe us?" "What choice do we have?" said Max. 2 strong hands grabbed Max by the shoulders, and he shouted, spinning around. "Oh," he said, relieved. "Dad." "It's not Dad," said his father in a forced Romanian accent. "It's Dracula." Max winced at the terrible joke. "Oh my goodness," his dad said, taking Allison by the hand. "Who must this charming young blood donor be?" "Dad!" Max snapped. "Something terrible happened." "Danny?" his dad asked immediately, letting go of Allison. "What's wrong? What?" "No," said Max. "Danny's fine." His dad's face grew stern. "Good," he said, then turned to Allison and excused himself. He put his arm around Max's shoulders and pulled him off to the side. "What is it?" It's complicated, okay? Promise you'll believe me." "You know I can't do that in advance." "Shoot, Max, look, whatever it is, just tell me." On stage, the skeleton did a complicated dance turn and lead into his microphone. "'Cause it's witchcraft. That's crazy witchcraft." On stage, across the room, Danny sidestepped a costume that made the wearer like Aladdin, seated on a flying carpet. She peered into the mouth of an alligator. "Mom?" she asked hopefully. The reptile shook its head and wadded off. She turned and nearly crashed into a blonde woman in a red bustier, the cups of which were built onto 2 spiraled cones. "Mom?" Danny asked, aghast. She nearly dropped Binks. "What are you supposed to be?" Her mother looked flustered. "Madonna," she said, and gestured to her costume. "Well, you know," she continued, suddenly self-conscious. "Obviously, don't you think?" Danny sighed. "Come here," she said, holding Binks out toward her mother in hopes that he would speak. "What?" asked her mom, crouching to hear her daughter better. Danny pointed to Binks's head with one hand. "This cat?" "Okay," she said. "He can talk. My brother's a virgin. He lit the black flame candle. The witches are back from the dead, and they're after us." She took a breath. "We need help!" Her mother paused and then placed a hurried hand on Danny's cheek. How much candy have you had, honey? The words came troubling out of Danny as she realized that her parents might actually not believe her. Mom, I haven't even had a piece. They're real witches. They can fly and they're going to eat all the kids in Salem. They're real. All right, her mother said wearily. Let's just find your father. The jazzy skeleton wrapped up his coonie. Thank you, ghouls and ghoulettes, he said to the crowd, grinning as the applause swelled and died down again. The band immediately began to up-tempo cover of Jay Hawkins' I Put a Spell on You. The Dennison family convened with Allison looking on from the sidelines. Guys, Mr. Dennison said impatiently, I love you, but enough is enough. Just calm down. Max fumed. But they're gonna come. Don't you see how crazy this sounds? Insisted his dad. Danny caught sight of something across the room. Max! She shouted. Max, they're here! Max turned away from his dad. His eyes rippled over the crowd when he spotted the three witches. Winifred apparently chewing out Mary and Sarah sucking face with a mummy. Max took off. He ignored his parents' plead for him to come back and instead scrambled onto the stage. He wrestled the microphone from the skeleton. Cut the music! He shouted. Hey man, I'm in the middle of a song, complained the singer. It's an emergency, Max told him, still speaking into the mic. Only for a minute. He turned to face the crowd. Will everybody listen up, please? Your kids are in danger. The crowd gasped, and startled adults pressed closer to the stage. 300 years ago, said Max, the Sanderson Sisters bewitched people, and now they've returned from their grave. The room full of people laughed. Hey, I'm serious, Max insisted. It's not a joke. I know this sounds dumb, but they're here tonight. They're right over there, he added, pointing to where the sisters stood, each of them looking nervous. A spotlight scanned the crowd and stopped on the three Sandersons, and everyone gasped again. Stepped away from them. A spotlight scanned the crowd and stopped on the three Sandersons, and everyone gasped again, stepping away from them. Winifred recovered the fastest. Thank you, Max, she said, tapping her long fingernails against her chin, for that marvelous introduction. The crowd laughed, and this time a smattering of applause also washed through the room. I put a spell on you, she said dramatically, throwing her hands in the air. The keyboardist took this as a cue and began to play a fizzy, sparkling tune. And now you're mine, said Winifred with a mischievous smile. Max heard Danny shout above the appreciative murmurs. Don't listen to them! She was right, he knew. What if the witches decided to actually put a spell on everyone? He leaped off the stage to help his sister as their parents dragged her toward the exit. Allison trailed helplessly behind them, trying to reason with Max's mom without being disrespectful. You can't stop the things I do, said Winifred, then broke into a trill. I ain't lying. She propelled to scatter, giggling. It's been 300 years, right down to the day. Now the witch is back, and there's hell to pay. I put a spell on you, she repeated, working the crowd and making her way to the stage, then breaking into a full-throttled song. And now you're mine! The snare drum roared and the bass and brass flared. How, Salem? She called, smirking at the children's attempt to warn the parents. My name's Winifred. What's yours? She sides to the edge of the stage. I put a spell on you. And now you're gone, 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 sang her sisters, taking over the 2 mics reserved for backup singers. So long! My whammy fell on you, crooned Winifred, and it was strong. So strong, sang Sarah and Mary. So strong, so strong. Your wretched little lives have all been cursed, sang Winifred, grinning when the audience cheered. 'Cause all the witches working, I'm the worst. I put a spell on you, and now you're mine. Max and Danny's parent deposited the kids near the front door. Take your sister home, said Max's dad. It's too late for pranks. He took his wife by the hand and led her back into the crowd. Max, Allison, and Danny didn't head downstairs right away. Instead, they watched in horror as the whole ballroom danced to the witch's song. Someone bumped into Max, and he turned, ducking when he saw Billy Butcherson struggling toward them through the delighted crowd. Danny screamed and grabbed Allison and dragged her to the other direction. If you don't believe, you better get superstitious, sang Winifred, having the time of her life. Ask my sisters. Ooh, she's vicious, they chorused. I put a spell on you, belted Winifred. I put a spell on you. Mary and Sarah joined her, and the 3 of them began to sing towards the crowd. I say into pie, off a Maddie up a pie, they chatted. I say it in a pie, off a Mabby impen pie, repeated the crowd. Max suddenly felt lightheaded, and the air seemed to fill with the smells of fresh-baked cookies and brownies. It's a spell, Max shouted, pressing his palms to his ears. Don't listen! Danny and Allison followed his example, but the adults within earshot ignored him. In kama kami yami, sang the witches on stage. In kama kami yama, the adults crowded back. Hey! Hey! Hi! Hi! Say bye-bye! Winifred belted out, waving dramatically at the crowd, then added with a smirk, bye-bye! The crowd roared and wrestled at the lights cut to the crimson wash. As the band struck up the next song, Winifred could be heard crackling as she sealed the curse. Dance! Dance! Dance until you die! Sarah pranced off the stage after her, swinging her skirts. Good work, Winnie, said Mary, catching up to them. Of course it was, said Winifred. From behind the velvet stage curtains, she watched the result of her dirty work. Now these silly parents will be occupied without a thought for their darling children at home in their darling beds. We will have a feast tonight, sisters, but first we must find my book. The kids ran down the block and into an alleyway behind Allegra's, one of Salem's most popular restaurants. The alley was filled with stinking trash cans and discarded kitchen equipment, including an industrial oven and some broken blenders, waiting to be hauled away. Max kicked the oven, cursing. He only managed to hurt his foot, so he limped back and leapt against the closest brick wall. This is really bad, he shouted. Max, come on, said Allison, startled. Come down. Look, he snapped, I want you to take Danny back to your house and don't let her out of your sight. Max, I'm not leaving you, said Danny. The restaurant door crushed open and Max, Danny, and Allison ducked behind the piles of trash. A chef stepped out to pick up a lobster out of the fish tank. Just as the door swung shut behind them again, Binks's eyes widened. Uh-oh, he said, and jumped down to share the kids' hiding place. The 3 witches strolled up, following Mary, who sniffed loudly as she walked. I smell, she muttered, tasting the air. Winnie! I smell, she paused, scrawled. She whitened under Winifred's hateful look. It's a bottom dweller, she explained. You know, you can eat it sometimes with lovely breadcrumbs, a little bit of marmalade, and Oh, and margarine, and oh, and olive oil. It is good. She began to stutter and devolved from nerves. Winifred gave a disgusting sniff in her direction and abandoned the alley, but Sarah stepped toward the trash cans, her blue eyes wide, as she searched for the source of some feeling she couldn't quite put her finger on. Sarah, Winifred said shrilly, though she didn't bother to wait for her. Sarah! As Allison tried to inch past the oven, its door flew open and blocked her way. She reached for the handle to close it, then paused and turned to Max with a conniving smile. I have an idea, she said. Mary and Sarah followed Winifred through town toward a slender ironwood gate. Behind the gate was the largest building the witches had ever seen, its dark shadows peering out of red brick walls. They'd come because of the smell, which was strong enough that even Winifred, whose sense of smell was poor, had caught it as the wind witched and switched. What is this place? Breathed Sarah. It reeks of children, Mary said, almost humming in delight. It is a prison for children, explained Winifred. She opened the creaking front gate and let in her sisters and cast a spell to unlock the prison's heavy front door. Above the door, tall white letters spelled the words Jacob Bailey High School. The hallways was wide, Jocelyn, and quiet when the sisters crept in, wider than the river that once ran through town, and quieter than the nights when they went down to it to fish out dead fish and fishermen. As they shut the door behind them, the place filled with an unholy howl. Welcome to high school hell, said a dark and wumbling voice. I'm your host, Boris Kaloff Jr. This announcement was punctuated by a thunderous crash and a crescendo of evil laughter. The sisters wove from one side of the hall to the other, trying to determine where the sound was coming from and how to avoid its owner. It's time to meet our 3 contestants. The disembodied voice continued. Sarah, Mary, and Winifred Sanderson. Read any good spell books lately? The shriek dark body of Thackeray Binks flickered through an open door. He hissed at the sisters and scrambled off. Winifred began to lead her sister toward him when a pleasant female voice said, Hello and welcome to the library. Bonjour. Bonjour à la bibliothèque. The sisters looked at one another and then shuffled into the dark room down a narrow hall. They found themselves in a distant wing where strange cravings sat on narrow white pedestals. I would like a book, the woman said. Just vas in la verre. Her voice came from within a small room lined with metal. The sisters leaped past the ironically and into a room which smelled strongly of burnt clay and children. The sisters grinned at one another, then looked for the source of the voice and in the smell. A black box with a red blinking light sat on one shelf. The woman repeated her last request, but her voice filtered through the mesh paneling of the box. I think she's trapped inside, said Mary, sounding sorry for her. Winifred's eyes fell to the floor, where mounds of clothes and socks and sleeveless tops and shorts in coordinating colors laid scattered. It's a trap, she said, but before she could turn, the heavy metal door swung shut. Even before she saw the girl's face through the window, she knew that she and her sisters were toast. Winifred reached for Sarah's arm. She was more afraid than she had been 300 years before, on the night she'd gotten them caught by the townspeople. Then as now, it was because of the thing she hadn't bothered to do. Her mother had been so angry at her, were she there. She had criticized her and told her she should be more thorough and more thoughtful More like. There was a click, and the room grew warm enough to make Winifred sweat. She muttered spells beneath her breath, every spell she could remember. In fact, spells of protection and revenge, spells for clearing storms and finding a lost pair of spectacles. The three children and even that damned cat, who looked awfully pleased with himself, peered through the narrow window of the box. Winifred's hair began to smoke, and then it lightened, and so too did the face hem of her dress. And then she yelled, "Wretches!" And she and her sisters burst into flames. Dead man's toes. Allison wanted to check the kiln for debris, but Max worried that seeking the witches' smoking bodies would scar Danny for life. Instead, the two of them decided to put the kiln on longer second cycle, hoping that the Sandersons would have mostly turned to ash by morning. They'd sneak back in the next day or Sunday to clean it out, but by Monday morning, no one would have no idea what had happened in the art's wing. Max turned to Danny, then who had moved away from the killing door when the witches started to burn. She held Binks close to her, petting him and kissing the top of his head. "I'm done," Max said to her, and when the words sank in, Danny beamed up at him. "Really?" He ran over and scooped her up, spinning her around and nearly knocking over an unfired ceramic skull that someone had made. "Really?" he said softly against the side of his little sister's head. His own body relaxed then, as all the adrenaline seemed to pour out of it. Allison walked over and put one hand on each of his shoulders, which sent butterflies careering through his digestive system. "Let's get home," she said. She was looking at Danny, but it sent a happy shiver down Max's spine. Allison took Max's hand when he sat Danny down, and they all slipped out of the school, breaking into a run as they neared the ironwork gates. Danny looped, and the sound of her celebrating made it all feel real to Max, too. "Farewell, Winifred Sanderson!" shouted Binks, leaping from Danny's arms to the rain-soaked street and racing about unlike a dog after its own tail. Max grabbed Allison around the waist, spinning her, and then set her down and gave Danny a big kiss on the cheek. Danny squealed, but didn't push him away. Instead, she grabbed his face and kissed his forehead, grinning. Binks dashed away, letting the jubilant kids down the block. Leaves fell around them like confetti in oranges and browns and golds. They crossed into the park, and Allison took off after Danny toward a grassy field where Danny could show off her handstands and cartwheels. Max relaxed against the park fence and looked up at Binks, who had settled onto the nearby branch of an oak tree. "We did it, Binks," he said, grinning. "We stopped them." "I've wanted to do that for 300 years, Binks said thoughtfully. He paused and then added, "Ever since they took Emily." Max's eyes faded into a serious look. He turned to face Binks, who was silhouetted against the obscene moon. "You really do miss her, don't you?" he asked. Binks looked away without answering, but Max could see the pain and self-loathing knitted across his small furry face. "Man, you can't keep blaming yourself for that," Max said. "That happened so long ago." Binks's narrow shoulders shifted up in a small shrug. "Take good care of Danny, Max," he said. "You'll never know how precious she is until you lose her." He leaped out of the tree and headed across the park, slipping into the shadows. "Hey, Binks!" called Max, straightening. The cat turned and looked at him. His eyes seemed to glow yellow in the low light. "Where do you think you're going?" Max asked, walking toward him. "You're a denizen now, buddy. One of us." "Come on, Binks!" Danny called from the clearing. "Let's go home." "Home," Binks repeated wistfully. He glanced from Max to Danny and then scurried after her as she linked one arm through Allison's and headed back to the sidewalk. As Max watched them saunter ahead of him, he thought about how he hated Salem as soon as his parents had announced their move, even before he knew anything about the town or their house or Allison Watts. Home, he said. The word sounded weird to him, but it also sounded right. In the cool October night, wisps of vapor, the colors of moss green algae and fresh grown and old branches filtered across the moon's full face. The vapor slipped through low-hanging clouds, but didn't become part of them, and after a few minutes, the vapor began to fall back to earth, as if weighed down by the condensation that had begun to beat on grass blades and window glass. It fell and funneled down the chimney at Jacob Bailey High School's kiln, and when every last breath of it was inside the school, it whirled and churned and knocked down the reinforced metal door. Winifred strode out of the kiln, hacking and batting at the smoke still hanging in the air. "Hello," she muttered tastefully and testfully. "I want my book. Bonjour, je vas m'en aller." Her hair was even wilder and wider than before. The grin plastered on her face was a murderous, but she otherwise looked just the same as when those bratty kids first trapped her. Her sisters followed her out of the broken kiln in similar condition, and Sarah trying desperately to wipe black ash from her sleeves and skirts. "Find them!" Winifred ordered, turning to Mary. "What?" "The boy and that blasted girl," she said, "and that child with the wretched cat. They have my book, and that book is our last chance to stay in this world. Find them!" I don't know," stuttered Mary. You don't know?" said Winifred scoffingly. "Well, Winifred, everything smells like smoke now." "What are you good for then?" demanded Winifred. I don't know. I'm still your sister, Winnie." She quelled under the look Winifred gave her then. "Never mind," she yelped. "I didn't mean it." Spinning away, Winifred swung angrily at the nearest sculpture, grabbing a cobalt blue vase and throwing it onto the concrete floor. The vase shattered into a dozen pieces. Winifred groaned. "Just find them," she said over her ash-dusted shoulder. Max caught up with the others and led the way home. He could tell that Danny was getting sleepy because she kept repeating herself and because her eyes stayed closed a little too long when she blinked. He took her hand as they passed by Town Hall, where the pumpkin ball was still going strong. The lead singer's vocals poured through the open door. "Jump, magic, jump, dance, magic, dance. Getting back into the kilns tomorrow is going to be easy," Allison said wearily. "All the adults are going to be asleep till lunchtime." Max yawned into the crook of his arm. "That doesn't sound so bad," he said. Max yawned into the crook of his arm. Allison smiled at him and shook her head. When they reached the Dennison house, the lights inside were still out. Max unlocked the door as Danny checked the bowl of candy they left on the porch. "Aw, man," she grumbled. "Only almond joys are left." Allison patted her back reassuringly. "Don't worry. You can have whatever's left over at my house." "Promise?" "Only if your brother brings you over tomorrow," Allison said, smiling at Max. Danny rolled her eyes. "There better be Twix bars if I'm covering for you two." "Mom," Max asked, leading the girls inside. "Dad!" He flipped on the light. His parents' coats were nowhere to be found, nor was his mom's keys, which she always had trouble tracking down despite dropping them on the entry table each time she came home. His dad had left behind his Swiss Army knife, though, and Max plucked it up and pocketed it just in case. He had a feeling that after that night, he'd be paranoid of witches for the rest of his life. "We got a new cat," Danny said, pushing past him. "Mom?" Max looked at Allison. "Well, I guess they're still partying," he said, stepping out of their way. "Come on in." They went to Max's room because Danny always liked to sleep there when she was anxious. She said that even monsters were afraid of the stink of teenage boys. Danny gave Zink and Binks a bowl of milk before slipping under Max's covers. "You're my kitty now," she said, petting Binks's head. "You'll have milk and tuna fish every day, and you'll only hunt mice for fun." "You're going to turn me into one of those fat, useless, contented house cats," Binks said. Danny giggled. "You betcha!" Allison clucked, watching them. She and Max were sitting on a pile of pillows near the staircase that led into the bedroom's loft. Allison grabbed a nearby blanket and wrapped it over her shoulders, and then leaned into Max. She was sure the sudden acceleration of his heartbeat would startle her, but her breathing was soft and steady. He wrapped one arm around her gingerly, afraid to disturb her, and she pressed her cheek more firmly against his chest. He wanted to touch her hair, but was afraid that might be too forward. Instead, he tucked his fingers around her elbow and thought about how he might ask her on their very first proper date. Part of him still wanted to take her to the hill in the graveyard that overlooked the harbor, where he went to think, but after all they'd been through, it seemed a bit creepy. Maybe he'd take her to the movie like Danny had suggested. "You know, Binks," Danny said sleepily as the cat finished his milk and leaped up to snuggle into her arms, "I'll always take care of you. My children will take care of you, too. And their children after that, and theirs after that, forever and ever." She trailed off, and when Max looked over, he saw that she was fast asleep. The night had gone quiet. It was so late that all the children of Salem were tucked into bed. So late, in fact, that their babysitters had fallen asleep. As well as drifting off, they waited for their employees to come back from the town hall pumpkin ball. As a result, the town felt deserted and eerie beneath the harsh light of its own street lamps. Jay and Ernie didn't seem to notice, however. Long-haired Jay perched on the hood of an old black sedan, while stocky Ernie leaned against the front bumper, unwrapping fun-sized candy bar after fun-sized candy bar and stuffing himself silly. Toilet paper cascaded around them from the branches of a sycamore tree that had mostly shed its leaves for winter. The boys knew the local cops would unfairly presume them guilty if a stranger's house, or worse, a classmate's, ended up decked out this way. So instead, they TP'd Jay's house. In the morning, his parents would just look disappointed and point them towards the stepladder. "You want to smash some pumpkins?" Jay asked, toying with a half-empty roll of toilet paper. "No," said Ernie around a mouthful of chocolate. "Well, then you want to look in the windows and watch babes undress?" "It's 3:00, Ernie said. "They're undressed already." Jay flung the paper away. "Well, then, you think of something." "I don't feel so good." "That's 'cause you're eating too much candy, you oinker," Jay said, smashing the latest bar from Ernie's hand. He hated when Ernie got this way, so fixated on one thing, and usually a thing that was totally boring, didn't involve Jay at all. The witches saw the boys before the boys saw the witches. Mary, who had been desperately sniffing the air for what felt like 2 hours, was about merely minutes, was the most excited to spot them. "The boy, Winnie!" she hissed, tugging on her red-headed sister's sleeve. "Are you sure that's the right one?" Winifred asked. Mary was not, but she knew that Winifred did not like insecurity. "I am," she said. "It must be." "It must be," said Winifred, "or is it?" "It is," Mary said with more conviction than she felt. "Good," said Winifred. Her voice grew darker and more vindictive then. "The girl who trapped us in that firebox is mine. I'll teach her to try and burn a witch." Jay and Ernie were, to an outside observer, old enough to be more than boys. But the night was heading toward dawn, and the Sanderson sisters were not eager to discriminate. The witches crept up behind them. As they did, Sarah danced through the soft, waving curls of white paper, spinning and smiling. Mary horned in on the strongest scent in the street. Without a second thought, she pressed her nose against the larger boy's left foot. "Yo, witch!" Ernie said, smacking her with Max Dennison's nearly empty candy bag. "Get your face off my shoe!" Mary scrunched backward, fixing her hair. "Oh," she said, frightened more of Winifred than of this boy with the strange hair and the useless weapon. "Wrong boy. Oh, sorry, Winnie." Sarah plucked up a scrap of toilet paper and swung it about, watching the thin material make exquisite shapes as it caught the air. Right, mamas? Winifred threw her hands up. Why was I cursed with such idiot sisters?" she demanded. Sarah did a little twirl. "Just lucky, I guess." Mary snorted before she could stop herself, and Winifred let out a tearless sob. The three sisters turned away to try and find their original targets. "Aw, man," said Jay. "How come it's always the ugly chicks that stay out late?" One by one, the Sandersons turned. Sarah in particular looked prepared to turn someone into a box turtle or a slug, something slow on the road and sweet on the tongue. "Chicks?" prompted Winifred. Winifred managed to bring the boys to their knees thanks to a particularly well-delivered lightning bolt. She gave them over to her sisters to drag back up the road to their house in the woods. Once there, they summoned two of their favorite cages from the closet. They'd once housed Winifred's prized Phoenix twins, the ones that Mary set free out of pity at the age of 12. Winifred was happy to have them empty now, for she shoved one boy into each cage and sealed the doors with iron locks. The cages crackled with electricity as she used her magic to rehang the huge iron things on their ceiling hooks. The impenitent boys wept and pled with pity without pause. Winifred ignored them. Their suffering would teach them not to disrespect their elders, even if they wouldn't have much time to live out that lesson. "We haven't much time left," she said. "We shall have to make the potion from memory." "Let us out of here," whimpered the blonde boy who had told Sarah that his name was Jay. "Yeah," said the other boy who called himself Ernie. "We're really sorry." "We think you're really cute," Jay added with an effort, hoping to win them over. "Hush!" snapped Winifred. She began to pace. "I can't think," she muttered to herself. "Remember, remember," her two sisters chanted in low voices, trailing her across the room. She hated when they did that, and both were stupidly convinced that it worked. "Remember, Winnie, remember." "Now I remember," Winifred cried, whirling around. Mary and Sarah gasped and jumped back. "I was here," Winifred said, ignoring them. She pointed to where the podium stood. "The book was there. You, Mary, you were here." Mary beamed at being remembered. "Sarah, you were in the back," Winifred added, fluttering her hand dismissively, "dancing idiotically. And the book said—" Mary leaned in. "Yes?" "I remember it like it was yesterday," Winifred said, grinning. "Yes?" asked Mary. "Oil of boil," Winifred recited, the long nail of her pointed finger dancing through the air as if reading a spell. "And a dead man's nose." Jay and Ernie exchanged a suffering look. "Nose?" Ernie mouthed. Jay cringed. Is this why the old ladies had kidnapped them? To turn them into potion ingredients? "Dead man's toes," Sarah crowed. "She's trying to concentrate," snapped Mary, shooing her away. Sarah shrugged and wandered off, nibbling her lucky rat tail. "No, his thumb," said Winifred softly. "Thumb?" asked Mary. Ernie chewed anxiously on his left thumbnail. "Or was it his gums?" asked Winifred. "A dead man's bums?" "Bums?" said Mary. "Bums? Sounds like Mums? Asked Winifred hopefully. Mums? Funds? Chungs? Said Winifred. Chungs? Jay asked, turning to give Ernie a startled, anxious look. Ernie drew a finger across his neck to make Jay shut up. Dead man's chungs, he said breathlessly. No, said Mary, there's no such thing as chungs. Winifred made a helpless sound. You're right. I am? Asked Mary, then with more certainty. I'm right? It's no use, said Winifred. I don't remember the ingredients. I've got to have my book! Behind her, Sarah grabbed the base of Jay's cage and spun it about, making him whimper and clutch at the hammered iron bars, and she giggled. Winifred went to the kitchen and retrieved the black flame candle, which she had been merrily flickering the whole night. Behold, sisters! She laminated it. The candle burns to a stub. Soon, our time will be spent, and we will have wasted our last chance. Curtains, Mary whispered, finally putting together Winifred's earlier rant. My dress is made of curtains, Sarah said before trading Jay's cage for Ernie's and twirling in the other direction. Winifred stopped past post of their sisters and threw open the nearest window. She leaned out and released a high-pitched keen. Book! Her shoulders shagged. Come home, she pleaded, or make thyself known. Mary patted her back as Winifred dissolved into a fit of sobs. And that is today's part 3 of Hocus Pocus. And we will see you this Friday with the end of Hocus Pocus and the last part and the last 5 chapters of it. We hope you will join us for that. Have a happy Halloween, and we will see you this Friday.